Reginald Petty, East St. Louis resident and civil rights activist. Well, I grew up in an area that was called Pollock Town, believe it or not. And it's between about 21st Street and the aluminum ore company. And it was at the time, it was a kind of mixed area of blacks and Polish people. But Polish people moved out, and it was still called Pollock Town. And so I grew up there, and basically there was a school called Attucks, Crispus Attucks, a grade school. And that's a grade school we went to, and basically I grew up there and basically went to the black schools. It was a strictly black community that time, and I like to tell people that people like me, my generation, we were conceived in East St. Louis, but the two hospitals in East St. Louis were white only. And so all of us were born in St. Louis. And Bourne's Hospital, which still exists, that was a black section. And so we were conceived in East St. Louis, but born in Bourne's Hospital in St. Louis. And at that time, it was strictly blacks on one side of town and whites on the other side of town. Well, my mother was a school teacher. At the time, you could go to college for 2 years and you got an education certificate. So she went to Illinois State College for 2 years and came back and taught school for 60 years, grade school. And so they were considered kind of, I guess, middle class. But I remember when I was the area I was living in was a dirt poor area, in that there was we had no paved streets. And I remember that at my earliest age, even though my mother was a teacher, she didn't make that much money. And I remember we had outdoor toilets. And there was no ice, no cold weather. I mean, no cold anything in our house. And so I remember at night being cold in the winter. And I remember that we had to go to an outdoor toilet because there was no indoor toilet. So this is kind of what I remember growing up when I was quite young. But I was able to get through high school and went to University of Illinois. But I remember at the time, if you graduated from high school, the University of Illinois had to accept you. They didn't have to keep you. And it was interesting that I remember being called in to the consulate about my first quarter and being told that that I probably would not be accepted for the next semester. And I said, well, I looked at my grades and I had 3 B's and a C. And the consulate was surprised that I had these grades. And so I was able to, I spent 2 years there and joined living in a fraternity house, Kappa house, that I'm fairly sure that I probably would not have survived that first semester if I hadn't been in a fraternity house, a black fraternity house, because they were able to kind of get me through. So I spent the first 2 years there, then I moved to Carbondale, Illinois, Southern Illinois University, a bachelor's and master's and things like that down there. And and I remember sitting on the bench at the University of Illinois at the basketball, and I remember the coach, a fellow went down and dunked the ball. There were 2 black basketball players who had been recruited. which would have been the first blacks at the University of Illinois. One of them was by the name of Ted Savage, who just died. Recently, he played baseball for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was the first black basketball player recruited, but he got a letter during the summer saying he had not made the team. And he left there and went to Lincoln University and played basketball there. And so it was one of those situations where blacks were always kind of like halfway there and halfway not there, if that makes sense. And so I got active there and in the fraternity, and just last week went to Chicago, found out that I was the oldest fraternity member, 60 years. I've been a Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and they had a 110-year anniversary at University of Illinois in Chicago. So they wanted me to go up there, so they paid my way up there, and I went up there, and I was the oldest of the members of the fraternity. The person I was sitting with, name was the oldest, the first black billionaire, the fellow who owned the BET, was also blocking on his name now. Roosevelt Johnson, was that it? No, it wasn't Roosevelt. He was the founder of BET, and he's the first black billionaire. And he also was a University of Illinois graduate. And he was there. I had a brother, and he died some years ago. And he was a business person. And but I think the thing that I find interesting between the two of us, for some reason, I became very active very early with the civil rights activities. I didn't want to be told that what I couldn't do. And so very early I became very concerned about people telling me that I couldn't live here, I couldn't do that. And when I went to Chicago in 1960, I met some people who were getting active in the civil rights movement. One fellow by the name of Ish Flory, and there was an organization called the African American Heritage Association. And I ended up being president of that organization, and my vice president was principal of the Black Muslim School. So I got to know Malcolm X and the Muslims and some of the other people at that time, and we became quite active with the trying to organize black communities. And to my surprise, I didn't know that the first settler in Chicago was a black person. And we found out that the school, there was a school that was there that was named after him, and I went to the school, and they didn't know that this person was a real person. And so we were able to get a day named after him, and so I was able to kind of get really active. And I've even made a trip to meet with Castro. And at that time, it was 1960, and so then from then on, I just got back active with Martin Luther King and whichever organizations were really involved, and I guess was one of the creators of the Black Power movement, I'm told. So, being from East St. Louis and growing up here, and I guess with my mother being a teacher, very early it was clearly that I didn't like being told that you cannot do this. And so that became a part of just kind of my life. And I think, I remember when I was in the South and the Peace Corps was just becoming started. And I remember I just came back and I got a call from a friend who was telling me that John F. Kennedy, who I had met, and some other people, were looking for people to go to Africa with the Peace Corps. Would I be interested? And I said, "Whoa, it sounds good to me." And so I got a call from one of the people staff asked me if I would go, and I said sure. So, but fortunately, I got a letter from the State Department saying my security clearance was rejected because of my activities with the Civil Rights Movement. But Kennedy got that waived, you know. So, and I'm going to Africa, and that also got me involved in languages, and French and some other languages, and it gave me a different world that I was living in Africa, different cultures, and that was something I spent, I guess almost about 12, 13 years in 4 different countries. I was director, but then whenever I would be back in the States, I was still active. The Congressional Black Caucus was just getting started, and so I got to know Shirley Chisholm and some of those people, and I got to work with them. And also there was an organization called National Advisory Council on Vocational Technical Education. And I ended up getting hired by them as the first black in that kind of a position. It was a presidentially appointed council, and 21 people all appointed by the president. So I was able to direct there, and Ernie Green from the Little Rock Nine was with the Department of Labor. So he and I and Shirley Chisholm, and we were able to do some things and get some things done. Civil rights, same kind of activities. So it's always been that kind of life. And to my surprise too, I had a brain aneurysm. And I was told by the doctors that I had 3 to 6 months to live when I was in DC. That's been 32 years. And that's what brought me back to East St. Louis. I was thinking that I had just a few months. And I came back here, and so I don't know whether God wanted me back here, whatever. That's what brought me, because my intention was to go to South Africa. But I came back to East St. Louis, and when I got back here, I was surprised to find that somebody came up to me and said, "By the way, we're looking we're doing a study of railroads across the United States, and we didn't realize there were 20-something railroads that came through East St. Louis, and we're looking for some books, some information." So they went down to the library, and I didn't know the library here had closed, the old library, and they went in there, and there were people living and there were. We found some. I'd never heard of Polk directories at the time. These were kind of like a telephone directory. They found some books in the 1800s, and I didn't realize at the time that there were C next to colors. So I was able to find out some Polk directories there, late 1800s, and I was able to go through and find out 1889, 1890. The number of colors that were there, 200 and something. And I also had a Yellow Pages, and I found out that Macedonia was the first black church that was listed. So all of this information, there was under these Polk directories. Unfortunately, the books were just thrown away. And but because we were Polk directories, University of Illinois, we asked them to put it on CD, so they have some of these books on CD now. And so people could look up, so I was able to find out my families who were there and where they were living in these. And it also had every block in the city and who lived in that block, these Polk directories. And so with all this kind of information, it just I've kind of found myself just trying to get information about who we are as a people. When Martin Luther King and the people were during the demonstrations in the South, I went down there, and again, he telling me I can't eat here, I can't do this. It was kind of like routine. So I was at two of the Selma marches with Martin Luther King, and I remember sitting at one of them, and King was saying, well, we can't, when they were sitting their horses and stuff. And King was saying, well, we have to, we can't do, we can't come next day. And I was one of the ones who was saying, we have to continue. We have to. And so I guess myself and Stokely and some of the others, kind of after that, kind of created this Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee, SNCC, because we were young and probably foolish, I guess, and we kind of wanted, because of our age to some extent, we didn't believe that anything could happen to us. You know? So we ended up, some of you, if you've been to the museum in D.C., there's a photograph of Stokely Carmichael, Angela Davis, and myself. And this was kind of one of the things that we were doing down there at our age. And we also were in conflict to some extent with some of the ministers, because we felt that the organizations could go from the bottom up. We should organize at the grassroots level up. A lot of the ministers, I think, felt that they should organize from the top down, get people in Congress, and kind of come down that way, and the ministers, and so there was kind of a conflict, not necessarily a negative one, but a kind of a conflict that we had, and I guess I was told by a couple of people that I had a record once of I think it was 36 arrests, I've forgotten what it was, something like that in 1 year in Jackson, Mississippi, just trying to register people to vote. And that was kind of crazy, you know. But again, at the time, I guess being afraid that we might be dying or something. So, you know, we really didn't think that was a big deal. You know, it wouldn't stop us from doing anything. You know. And I look back on it now, and it's kind of crazy. But at the time, we didn't. And in fact, I'm concerned now that I look at some of the younger people now, and I'm wondering how, I'm looking for some of the I guess some of the people who had some of the same feelings that we had about taking on the system. And I'm looking for leaders to come up now, and I'm not seeing many. It's bothering me a little bit. Because we were in our 30s, we were young, you know. But I'm not seeing that level of leadership in the black leaders now who had the same kind of vision that we had. Sports, for example, I played a little basketball, ran a little track, and that, particularly when you're running track, you're running against somebody, and you have to believe that you can win, you know. And so I think that was a big help. And when I'm running against white people, my belief that not only do I have to win, I have to run against these white people. I have to win. And I think in my education, I had a kind of, I also, because of my mother and other people in the school, I was told that Fred Tier was one fellow I remember well, who always told us that you can be what you want to be. You can be as successful as you want to be. And I remember that was something that he told us. And he would put things in almost put things in front of us that we were told that we could not do this, you know. And we would say, well, you mean we can't do it, you know, and we would just do it, you know. And there were always these people who were telling me as I was in high school that I could do better, that I was as good as any white person. One of the things, this piece right here.
This one?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite African pieces. What I'm saying, what this is when I was in near Timbuktu, and this is when kids reach 14 years old. They're being initiated into manhood. What this says is that it's like a teaching tool. So you can't understand the future without looking to the past. You have to respect the women and stand on the shoulders of your ancestors. It's a teaching tool. This was in near Mali and near Timbuktu in West Africa.
What were you doing?
And I was a director of Peace Corps in Burkina Faso country right next door. But I was in and out of that part and was visiting this area. And the lady had, how's the best way to put it? She was having her period and the other things, a number of things, negative things that happened. And when you go to certain places, a lot of negative things happen. All of a sudden, a whole series of those magical things are thrown away. They have to create some others. And this was being thrown away. And so I asked her, could I have it? They said, yeah, take it, because we have to now create some others. Probably SNCC, I guess, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And when we started that, this was because of the young people. And we kind of wanted, we liked King, but we also thought that we had a different way of doing things. So when we started this, we were organizing at the grassroots level. We were organizing the communities level up. And that was something that we got. In Chicago, the African American Heritage Association was the first time that I had Dick Gregory, a very close friend of mine from high school, and he was in Chicago at that time. He was the first person who began to talk about social class as a problem, in addition to race. And he was the one who had talked about that if you have money, you have an obligation to do something at the bottom up. And he was seeing a number of wealthy black people and wealthy white people who, once they reached a certain level, forgot who they were and where they came from. And he was organizing the fact that no matter how much money we have, we're still black and we're still racist against us. And so we began to organize in Chicago, particularly at the grassroots level, the people who had the money to get it to the people who didn't have the money. And so this was something that, I guess, one of the first times that we began to look at social class and the importance of this. And this was the African American Heritage Association. And I remember the trip I made to meet with Castro. We were also trying to organize the grassroots people with Africa. And I remember when I met with Castro, we had sent a couple of people, and I had made one trip also to Africa at that time, trying to organize with some of the people in Ghana and some other countries. And so I found out about a few years ago that the trip I made to meet with Castro was, the whole thing was taped by the CIA, which wasn't anything they could do because I wasn't talking about communism. I was talking about Castro and Africa and this kind of thing. So, but so I often told some of the young people now when I talk to them that if you got about 10 people in a room, you probably better assume that the government is going to be knowing what it is you're doing. So don't assume that that all of this is not being taped. This is what I have to do. It wasn't something that about what I should do. It was something that I should do, and I guess I was concerned that more people should be doing it. But it wasn't something that I thought about whether I could do it or not. I met while I was in Africa. I also, when I was in Swaziland, which is right next to South Africa, I was in and out of South Africa, so I got to meet with Mandela, and I got to know his family and stuff, and I was surprised when I met with him how I thought he would be more angry at white people, and I was surprised how he wasn't, how he felt that that people are people, and that that if he got out, that he would be, he very much was a student of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, kind of nonviolent in that way, which was the reason that he and his wife got divorced when he got out of jail, because his wife she was much more negative, much more about the white system than he was. But anyway, I did get a chance to meet with him, and just organizations, I guess that and the SNCC and Peace Corps and National Advisory Council on Voc Ed, and there was also in East St. Louis, there was an organization when I moved back here called MECO, Metro East Church-Based Citizens Organization. And at that time, this was an organization that, of all the ministers, a lot of the ministers in East St. Louis, and they asked me if I would chair that, so I chaired that for a while. And unfortunately, the ministers couldn't get along after a while. And but it was I did get some funding for that organization, and we had a staff and all of that for a while. And MECO was called. And also too, there I forgot during the poverty program, Johnson's poverty program. I was here for a while with that, and we set up the poverty program here in East St. Louis. Forgotten about that then. And a lot of different groups have participated in over the years. It was just somebody we were just involved with. It wasn't anything special. All of us were trying to, I guess the thing that I find most frightening in a way, I had talked with Malcolm X about a week before he was killed. And I tried to warn him what I was hearing, that he was getting too threatening to the Muslims, to the black Muslims at that time, and that I had heard that he was going to be killed, and he was. And but he had just made a trip, as a lot of people know, to Africa, and met a lot of white Muslims, who were considered white, but who were Muslims. And he was kind of modifying his position, about all white people, this and all the white people being that. And, and so we had a kind of a different viewpoint about things like that. And Also, too, I guess I should mention, too, that when I was in Africa, my wife was Caucasian. So both of my kids two of my kids are mixed. So we spent most of the time in South Africa going with this white lady, you know, and this was just, you know, kind of like not done, you know, and I remember seeing Superman 2. I was walking down the street in South Africa, and I said, I want to go see Superman. And the guy said, you can't go see Superman. You can't go, you know. I said, here we go again, you know. So I went to the embassy, and I said, look, I'm going to the movie. I said, oh, God, you can't do that. So I went to see Superman, and went to the bathroom and told me I got to go to the bathroom, and I went in there and wasn't supposed to be, and there was just a whole bunch of, just trying to irritate people to the extent that I could. I think one of the things I've realized over the years that people are people. For example, when East St. Louis became all black, at the time I had assumed that all we had to do was take over the black community to become black community. But then I found out that as soon as we take over, we run into some of the same problems that we had when white people were there. We find out that power corrupts most people. And most people, when they get in power and you get money, you tend to want to maintain that power regardless. And whether you're black or white, that seems to affect most people. And so I find out that color doesn't necessarily reflect something positive. It can, but it doesn't necessarily. And I think at one time I thought it would, you know. So I'm looking now at the places, Detroit, you name the cities now that are kind of black controlled, and I'm seeing some of the same problems that I found when the white people were in control. I'm hoping that the younger people, that your generation, can look at people as people and realize that there's some changes that have to be made. And you're going to have to be, and it's going to have to be partly black or white. And and I apologize a lot of times to your generation, because I think that the system, an economic system that we're under, is partly a cause of what's going on. I do not like the idea that 2% of the wealth is owned by the same people, the billionaires. That, to me, I don't like that system. There should be more money from that group, you know, coming down. To me, there should be no poverty in a place like the United States. You know, there's no reason for that, for there to be poverty, but it is. You know, so the system that I think that I would like to see your generation dealing with is kind of more of an economic system than a civil rights social system. It's a combination. It's not one or the other. But it's going to be more difficult because you're going to be fighting money folks. I think one of the things I've learned is that this may sound strange, but that I seem to be directed. When I look back at my life now, I seem to have been directed in a way that I was not directed, if that makes sense. For example, when I look at the what I'm working with now is the East St. Louis Historical Society. It was something I hadn't really thought about, but now I'm doing that. I looked at when I first went to Chicago, University of Chicago. I had no intentions of doing that, but all of a sudden I was doing it, and I was going to Chicago to tell them that I was not going to do it, but I was in an automobile accident, which ended up me saying, okay, I guess I got to do this. And I remember in an automobile accident, I was thrown out of the car. The door on the trunk was found under the dashboard. I was thrown out of the car and didn't have a scratch. And I remember the guy asking me, people who pull up to me, was I a Democrat or Republican? And I remember thinking, if I give him the wrong answers, he's going to leave me here on the side of the road. So I guess I'm saying this because there's so many places where I've ended up that, as I said, I wasn't planning on coming here. I was planning on going to D.C., back to Africa. But yet I ended up in this guy telling me that I've got 3 to 6 months to live, which brought me to East St. Louis, back to East St. Louis. So there's been so much of that in my life that I've kind of wondered, am I being directed, if that makes sense. I guess I've reached that point now where I just kind of say, okay, we'll see what's coming up next. When I met Seth and I met, and for some reason Seth wanted me to meet people he just met, Gloria Boozman and McHenry. Why? So I guess when I look back on my life, I'm seeing a lot of these incidents. And whether or not this is something that I did, quote, it's hard for me to say it happened. I think that whatever you are feeling that you ought to be doing, do it. Don't let anything stand in your way, because you are going to be told what it is you ought to be doing. But there also is going to be another part of you that's going to be saying, yes, but if you really listen to what it is that says, you really ought to be doing this, do it. Do it. And I think, too, that find out those people or that person or those people who can help you move in that direction that you know you ought to be doing. Because they will be coming to you. Listen to them. Because there are going to be some others, too. But you're going to get the right direction. Follow it. And you'd be surprised how things will open up. How things will open up.